Welcome to Whisky Talk, Malts and Music, brought to you by the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, here in the vaults in Leith. My name is Vic Galloway. I'm a broadcaster, author, musician and music journalist, and the idea of this podcast is to bring together single cask, cask strength whiskies and music. I ask creative people to pair up 4 drams with 4 pieces of music. We discuss their selections and we go off on tangents into their lives and careers. I hope you enjoy. Slanjava. Welcome to Malts and Music, James Yorkston.
Hello, Vic. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Good to have you here. Now, James, we should say straight away, right at the beginning of this podcast, that you and I are old pals.
Very old friends, yeah.
I think I've known you longer than my own brother. So I've known you since I was about 3 years old.
Yeah.
We've made music together. We go back right to the beginning of our lives, pretty much. So there probably will be the occasional comment or whatever that people might go, that sounds a bit over-familiar.
Right, yeah.
But there you have it. Now, James, pairing up music and whiskey is quite a kind of esoteric, odd concept. How have you found the process?
Well, I've enjoyed it, but I mean, I didn't approach it with any particular scientific manner.
Yeah.
I tasted the whiskey, and I just the first thing that came to my mind, I wrote down. I thought that was the obvious and best way to do it.
That's exactly.
I've enjoyed it. You know, it's been nice trying these different whiskies, and it's been good listening to the music again, and also perhaps getting a few things to you that you might not have heard because you're obviously very knowledgeable in your music taste.
Well, no, I mean, as I say, you and I go back a long way, and I still have compilation tapes that you made me on cassette. I've still got them all in the collection, and you've always turned me on to music that I'd never heard before, and hopefully vice versa.
Yeah, of course.
But certainly, you know, one of the reasons I'm into reggae, for example, is partly John Peel, but partly your good self as well.
Yeah, but I mean, for me, obviously, it was my brother. One of my elder brothers was into reggae, so he passed it on to me. I mean, it's just how music works.
Yeah, it's just how it works. But you've always dug deep, and you've always gone down musical paths that a lot of my other friends and associates don't go down. So you always present music which, you know, sometimes I dislike it, but sometimes I absolutely fall in love with it. But that's, yet again...
I've always had that mining thing where I like going back, trying to find beautiful things deep in the mine, you know. And quite often that means going back to the earliest version, especially with traditional music, so you can hear the kind of purest version. But also on a track like King Crimson, you know, the track Red, I remember playing you that, and the first half, it just sounds like a really sort of dire straight slide, and then the very heavy guitar solo comes in and just tears it up, you know.
Oh yeah, Starless and
Bible Black, sorry.
Yeah, on the Red album.
This was 20 years ago, 20 years ago.
No, and
but it's stuff like that I've always had this thing about finding, and somehow I find it, I don't know, more valuable than if you go straight to a Paul McCartney album where it's going to be lots and lots of great songs, lots and lots of hits. Somehow, if it's in amongst the kind of noise and the garbage, I've always appreciated it more.
Yeah, well, and I think if you've got one of those inquisitive minds, which you obviously do, then you keep instinctively digging and looking. I mean, you know, now at home I listen to a lot of jazz and a lot of African music and stuff, which perhaps even 10 years ago I was listening to less of, you know. It's just the way things work. Anyway, we're here to discuss whiskey and music, and we've got 4 drams, 4 pieces of music without giving the game away straight away. You are also, as well as a massive music fan, you're a whiskey fanatic as well. And you're one of the first people that I know of my sort of generation that really went into whiskey like a good 10, 15 years ago, like really immersed, maybe even longer than that.
It was longer than that. It was 25, almost 30 years ago. I remember, you know, you grow up and you don't really know, or I didn't really know anything about whiskey, but then the interesting bottles started landing on my lap, gifts from people, and then I seem to remember the first one I got, which really showed me that whiskey could be very different, was, of course, Lagavulin, which is one of the main ones for people as a sort of gateway to help my bowl. This tastes completely different to what we'd had up until that time, which was, you know, the bells and all that sort of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
So that was a big one for me. But then I remember also getting bottles of Irish whiskey from relatives, and really struggling through this kind of supermarket stuff, but finding something within it. Mm-hmm. And the lack of money and the quantities of whiskey just led me to drinking more whiskey.
Yeah. But no, you're absolutely, and you're not the first person to say. A lot of people, and myself included, once you've gone past the blends and the sort of basic, bells and grouse and all that stuff, with no disrespect to them, of course.
Yeah.
The really heavily peated stuff, the Lafroigs, the Lagavulins, they blow your mind.
Yeah, of course.
And then, of course, you realise you don't have to have that extremity at all times. We do have, out of the 4 drams...
But they're like the biggest fireworks.
Yeah, we have a peated one towards the end.
Yeah.
But let's go into dram number 1, which is, as with the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, has a brilliant title, Flowers Crushed by a Falling Oak Tree. 73.128 is the cask number, and here's a little bit of chat about it. It says, our introduction was adorned with honeysuckle, potpourri and apple blossom, the sweet fragrance from which blended with toffee apples, green herbs and lemon sponge cake, topped with milk chocolate. That's just a little taster of some of the more verbose tasting notes. What do you think about the tasting notes? Do you like the stuff of that?
Oh yeah, I think they're hilarious.
Right.
I mean, it's funny that the words that I had there was I had chocolate in there as well. No, I love playing with language.
Yeah.
And that's kind of nonsensical, but at the same time, it's good fun.
Good fun, yeah.
And I think one's allowed to have fun.
Yeah.
So
well,
I'm all for.
So this is part of the juicy oak and vanilla flavor profile. It's a Speyside. It's 59.4% alcohol. It's a 10-year-old as well, and it's a second fill ex-bourbon barrel. So there's some of the facts and figures for you.
The apple comes out straight away.
Yeah, on the nose, definitely.
Yeah.
It is quite fruity, actually. Now, you've tasted all these, obviously, to pair them up. I'm tasting them for the first time.
All right, okay. Well, good luck.
Yeah. Okay, cheers. Regular listeners or viewers will hear me going, quite a lot in these podcasts.
I think that's the first time ever in our relationship where there's been 5 seconds of silence. You know that? one of the other of us has been jumping in with some quip or other. This is wonderful whiskey. This is a great tasting, very subtle, a tiny bit of fire at the end.
Yeah.
But the chocolate is there, the apple is there.
Mm-hmm.
It's
I don't think, some drams are quite, alcohol heavy on the nose or on the front of the mouth. As you say, it does have a bit of fire and a kick at the back.
At the back. Yeah.
But it's not. It doesn't feel, considering it's almost 60% alcohol, it does not feel too alcohol heavy.
This would be great after a heavy meal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's nice and light. It's quite sweet as well.
I quite like a whiskey as an aperitif as well. Sometimes it gets my sort of flavour buds going. A nice single malt, and I could even have this before a meal, half an hour before. So you paired this up with Ted Lucas. It's so easy when you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Now, doing my research, finding out what you'd chosen and having a listen. Here's an artist you mentioned. There's a couple of things that I may not have heard before. This is one of them. I've done a little bit of searching around. Ted Lucas was songwriter, singer, and guitarist from Detroit, who originally, and he was a session guitarist. Played on some Motown records, including R. Dean Taylor. Maybe he played on.
Oh, really? Ghost in My House.
Yeah.
Really? Wow, that'd be amazing if that was him on that.
Yeah, and with various bands that he was in, he ended up supporting Zappa, Yes. All sorts of different people of that time, but this is from a kind of acoustic, folky, psych folk solo record. Tell me about, how did you discover this?
I have no idea how I first heard his music, but it's the album was made, as far as I can remember, to show off his songwriting. But it's an album that it's so slow, and the harmonies are so sweet and chocolatey. Mm-hmm. And there's a song in it called, and the title may be slightly wrong, It's So Nice to Be Stoned. And that sums up the album, really. It's so nice to be stoned. So you've got this really lovely flowing melody going along with the close harmonies on, and they're like perfect songs.
I know
There's
what you
some
mean.
like 7 or 8 of them, and they're perfect songs. But then So, and this was his example. He's like, hey, I'm a songwriter, man. People take my songs. I have no idea if that's what he sounded like. But,
let's just imagine, yeah.
But then the other side, there's two terrible pieces of music. There's like a long rag thing, which isn't, as far as, I mean, it's not a rag I recognize. I wouldn't claim to be an expert, but it's not something I recognize in any way. And then there's like a horrible funky thing, which sounds like a sort of stone thing at a party where there's one guy doing sort of basic kind of funk and there's one guy playing bongos.
Right,
just really terrible things.
Yeah.
But the songs are worth the admission.
This one, obviously, you chose this, so I had to listen to the album as well, but I specifically listened to this one. It sounds like an utterly classic song, and it sounds very simple. You know, that's, again, you can't beat just a really straightforward song with a beautiful, catchy melody and a great harmony. And it has, it's I believe he released this in 1975, and no one really paid much attention to it. And then it sort of caught people's ear. I think it was re-released in 2010 or something like that, as far as I know.
Right.
But
okay.
It's really accessible. I mean,
oh yeah, the first half. It's a good example actually to young musicians out there. The first half is perfect. And I don't know if maybe he had another 5 or 6 songs which were really bad or something, but he hasn't put those on. Instead, he's put this junk at the end. Yeah. But because of that, you focus on the amazing stuff at the beginning. I've got no idea if he's still alive or anything like that. But if you like really mellow, stone-sounding acoustic folk pop, then it's an unbeatable album.
It's very, as you say, it's very poppy in its own kind of, you know, almost late 60s, even though it is mid 70s. But it's
is it really mid 70s? I would have placed it maybe 1968 or something.
Yeah, I would have done the same. Like if I hadn't sort of looked into it a little bit. Yeah. But perhaps, you know, he didn't seem to have any success with it. So maybe he recorded it and wrote it in the late 60s and released it 5 years later.
You can't imagine him having success with it though. It's such an odd record. I mean, the songs are incredible, but they're not going to be songs like Paul Simon or Bob Dylan or something where people are going to go running after them. It's like kind of oral Valium.
Yeah.
It's
so why? I mean, you mentioned chocolatey. Why pair it with this particular dram then? Was it just like the kind of easiness of it?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I mean, as I said at the beginning, I didn't want to try and be too clever with what was going on here. I mean, later on, in fact, the next one I actually pair with an Irish singer, you know, and it's obviously not Irish music, not Irish whiskey. It was just the easiness of it. That's exactly it. I mean, it's a very easy album. And if I made a whiskey and I was paired with Ted Lucas, I'd be over the moon with it.
Yeah,
you know, I'd think, oh, that's cool.
He's an introduction to me, and that, I mean, this brilliant doing this podcast with various different guests over the last few months is being introduced to new music, new old music. I can tell you, he did pass away in 1992, so 30 years ago, unfortunately.
Sorry about
that. He seems to have been making music right to the end, and he had like this varied career and being a session guitarist on Motown Records, amazing. But I would, on the strength of this song, it's so easy when you know what you're doing, and go into the album, have a listen. I don't think people will be disappointed. I think they'll be like pleasantly surprised.
I would hope so. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very easy. It's great, very easy pop songwriting. You know, one of the things about listening to music I find is if you're somewhere safe that you can trust, I'm talking about musically, it's such a easy place to be in. As a listener, and if you compare that to an overworked, so much of today's music, but so much of today's music, because of digital thing, it gets worked and reworked, and songwriters, they feel the need to really pile things on, trying to get that extra percentage out, but really they're just making it worse and worse. I think the beauty is in the song, and with these Ted Lucas recordings, it's so easy because he knows what he's doing.
You're absolutely. It's a very aptly named song as well. Before we move on to Dram number 2, which Dram number 1's almost gone from mine. You don't feel any needs to finish them all.
No, I'll drink at my own speed. Thank you very much.
But as I said right at the beginning, we know each other. Tell us, where you grew up and It's the East Nuka Fife.
Yeah, the East Nuka Fife, King's Barns and the East Nuka Fife. Yeah. I mean, we moved there when I was 3, I think. Mm-hmm. Beforehand, we'd been in Cooper, and then we'd been down and up. And my family are from all over. My mother was born in Egypt, mm-hmm. and it's just my family are from all over. We come both lines. Well, my father's line goes via Wales, but both lines come down from Aberdeenshire, mm-hmm. and I'm sort of here now, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, growing up in King's Barns, obviously. My childhood home was directly opposite yours. And I remember when, you know, as young as I was, when your family moved opposite, because you're one of
7.
Yeah, so it wasn't quite 7 children at that point, but I was like, wow, loads of people to play with. And that's exactly what happened. There was loads of games of Tig and...
Oh, yeah. You know. I mean, I remember most of our shared childhood being wonderful. You know? I mean, and you were definitely missed when you left the village, because, I mean, there wasn't much to do in the village. Yeah. And I mean, we were best friends for a good few years, you know, and the fact we're still talking here is testament.
We don't hate each other too much,
But then we were in bands together in our 20s, which never went anywhere, which is good and bad. You know, I've got friends now, sort of my sort of age, who've had kind of bands that have done well. People like Steve Mason, Malcolm Middleton, Martin Carr. You know, they had their hits when they were younger, and there's a part of me that thinks that would have been nice if we had had a band in our 20s that we could have, hey, should we do a reunion thing? But it never happened. I mean, we were never...
We worked hard, we tried our best, we really did. But there's also part of me that thinks that perhaps if that first, you know, one of those first bands had really taken off, whether we'd still be here to tell the tale.
Yeah, absolutely.
We were a bit more wild back then.
100%. And I ended up signing to Domino, who have been an incredible label to me, and who knows if I would have signed to Domino if I'd been known as the bass player from the Farts.
Miracle Head or one of those bands. So I finished the first Dram.
Okay, well, congratulations.
So I'm not. It's not a race. But so growing up in Fife, it was kind of, you sort of mentioned, it was kind of idyllic in some ways. By the beach, forest, not much to do, good place to. The way I always see it is sort of your imagination.
Yeah, I mean, I remember. One of the things I remember really clearly is when we had very snowy winters, and we'd be stuck in these we'd be stuck in King's Barns. You couldn't get out of King's Barns. All the roads were closed, and we'd be off out with the sledges and just walking for hours to find a hill. Yeah. Even though the hills weren't very far away, just because, you know, we were young and there was lots of snow, and I remember it being quite idyllic, really. Yeah. You know, up until a certain age.
Lying on the front lawn in my, parents, just outside the front of the house, and just staring up at watching the clouds moving slowly. And just not having a care in the world, and just letting my imagination, let loose and run wild. And we obviously found music. I always say this as well. If we'd had the internet when we were young lads, we would have known everything about every kind of music going. But that really informed our world.
Oh yeah. Now I remember your father's record collection. I remember he was very into. Obviously, he was into a lot of different music. But at the time, I remember he was very into rock and roll. Yeah. And I remember dancing around on your lawn, listening to, I think it was Bill Justice or someone like that. And just. That sort of exposure to music, I remember being very important, and the enthusiasm of youth. What is this? Listen to that, And it's these guys going ding 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 ding, and kind of dancing around and just getting really excited by it, And that, I guess that was a huge thing for me. It probably was for you as well, having somebody else living as close, who was equally enthused and fell in love with music. If I'd been into. Actually, I prefer tractors, Mike. Can we go and look at the tractors? Then we may not have fallen in quite as... I mean, I do love tractors, you understand.
Nothing wrong with tractors.
But not as much as I love music.
There was some kind of weird synergy going on. Growing up in the middle of absolute nowhere, really, realistically. And both sort of... Well, initially climbing trees and going sledging and playing on, riding a BMX and stuff. And then discovering... Adam and the Ants and all of that stuff. But you know, growing up in Fife, moving to Edinburgh, and playing in bands together and that kind of stuff. You've ended up back in Fife as well. Do you see yourself as Fife for life for the rest of time, or do you think?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'd be very if I have to move from Fife, something would have gone. I don't want to say wrong. I don't want to tempt fate, but yeah, I can't. I absolutely love living in Cellardyke. Mm-hmm. It's so quiet and peaceful, and my studio is right by the water, and the kids can walk to school, and there's not much to do, not much to spend money on. You know, I still spend a lot of time on the road, so I'm away from Fife quite a lot. But no, I absolutely adore it there. I love Edinburgh. You know, I love Edinburgh, and 3 weeks ago I had a couple of nights in Edinburgh in the middle of the tour, and we were staying up near Morningside Way, and I was walking around those old big houses and things, and remembering how much I loved going for long walks in Edinburgh, and the smells when the rain's been coming down, you know, and the architecture. You know, there's some great things about Edinburgh, but it was a funny thing. I had like a calling to go back to Fife. Yeah. It was. I'd been in Edinburgh for almost as long as I'd been in Fife, and I was like, and I had to move back, and I've never once regretted it. And the difference is, I've always used this as an example. The train from London to Waverley takes about 4.5 hours, and then it's about an extra hour to get to Lucas, and then a half-hour drive to my house. And I've never missed that hour. I've never begrudged that hour. I've never thought, bloody hell, I wish I'd stayed in Tollcross still. Yeah. I'm delighted to be in Fife. Absolutely love it.
Well, you never know. You might have your old neighbour become a neighbour again one day, because I'd quite like to go back to Fife if things allow. But you never know. Let's move on to dram number 2, which is called A Day at the Funfair. It's a 9-year-old Highland whiskey. Alcohol content is 58.9. It's the spicy and sweet profile. It's 9 years old, as I say, recharred hogshead cask. And here are just a couple of tasting notes. We imagined a sunny day at the funfair, queuing for candy floss with the wind carrying a whiff of chestnuts roasting on an open fire. On the palate, we moved on and had grapes on a skewer dipped in chilly white chocolate with a mug of steaming hot white mulled wine. So many, descriptions in there within 2 sentences. How did you find this then? It's 68.49 a day at the funfair.
So when I was, I don't normally drink Irish whiskey. I've never really been a fan of it. There's a few things I've had over the years which I've enjoyed, but I've never really been a fan. I remember flying over to Dublin once and doing a long interview that happened to be held in a distillery, and I was wondering what was going on. Why is it in a distillery? And then there was lots of photos, and I was like standing beside the barrels. Why am I beside the barrels? All this sort of stuff. And then the thing came out, and it was an advertising promotion. And all the time the guy had been asking me what I thought about Irish whiskey, and I was like, no, I'm not really into it. There's that whole kind of cat thing that I don't like, the kind of... I used to work in a kennels, in the catteries, and there's the smell of the cattery came through the Irish whiskey too much.
Oh, right, wow. So, that's certainly not a good recommendation.
No, it's not a good recommendation. So I've never been a fan of Irish whiskey. This, obviously, is Scotch.
Yeah.
But the first thing I smelled was something in there that really reminds me of Irish whiskey.
Okay.
But not in a bad way.
Not in a bad way, right.
And
okay.
So my notes were subtle Irish, and then Parma Violet, and then candy floss, as you said.
Well, candy floss.
Because there is that smell of the fair, and I said Parma Violet, didn't I? Lavender. There is that smell that reminds me of... do you remember the Lammas in St Andrews?
It's funny because the Lammas Fair, as soon as it said Fun Fair in the title, I was thinking...
Oh, did it say Fun Fair on the title?
Yeah.
Well?
I was at the Lammas Fair in St Andrews. I mean, it's like it's a rites of passage for
the Lammas
anyone.
Market. Yeah.
Anyone growing up in East Newcastle Fife has been to the Lammas Fair and Lammas Market, which takes over the main 2 streets in St Andrews, and great fun when you're a kid. I'm like, as I say, this is the first time tasting these, and on the nose, immediate sort of sweetness, candy floss, if you like. It's almost like it's that kind of saccharine-y sweet, kind of very nice nose. I mean,
yeah.
I'm going in for a taste.
How strong is it?
What did I say before? 58.9.
Okay, I'm just going to put a wee drap in and see what happens.
Yeah, and of course it...
Normally, I would drink... I mean, I love cask strength whiskey,
yeah.
because one of the things I love is the alcohol, which is why it's such a dangerous thing, but the actual alcohol itself is such an attractive thing. But, oh, wow.
Does it? I might follow you in that. I tend not to add too much water to my whiskey. I just... It all depends, but something like this is very easy sipping. I mean, if flowers crushed by a falling oak tree, Dram number 1. I think this is even easier to...
this is very smooth. Yeah.
If the water changes it quite distinctly, I might try a bit as well.
What's that? There's something...
Even the nose, it smells different when you add some water on this one.
Yeah, no, that's a very drinkable.
Isn't it just? Now, so you've mentioned Irish whiskey and you've paired this with...
isn't Irish. Obviously, that isn't Irish whiskey.
No, but you've mentioned as a theme Ireland, and you've chosen an Irish singer here. Elizabeth Cronin, Bess Cronin, and you've gone for the little pack of tailors.
Because it was the only one on Spotify.
But a classic example. Not that I'm a world expert in Bess Cronin, but this is a cappella. This is her singing.
Unaccompanied.
And you mentioned right at the beginning of the podcast that you go to the source. You try and find the unadorned, like the primal, the essence of a kind of music. And this sounds like that.
Yeah, this is it's Sean-nós, which is the old style unaccompanied music from Ireland, really. And Bess Cronin, Elizabeth Cronin, was a singer from Cork, Kerry sort of way, and she was recorded twice, one by Alan Lomax, and I think he recorded this Little Pack of Tailors, which is a great song. Little Pack of Tailors. And she's got such a lovely, soft voice, and because she was an Irish speaker by
I love the fact she sort of pauses for breath as well.
But she's kind of, some of it is, she's singing it in such a syrupy, not syrupy is the wrong word, such a fluid accent, that some of it sounds like she's singing in reverse, which is something I adore. And she's one of my favourite ever singers. I mean, I'll sit down and listen to her output just all the way through, and she brought some incredible versions of songs too, things which have become very well known in the traditional canon, things like the Good Ship Kangaroo, that she brought through, and. So that's why she's there. She's always on my mind. She's one of the best singers for me. She's the essence of everything that I like almost about music, which is right down to the beginning. And there's no... I love a good vocalist. I love... do you know the X Factor, that program? Do you know when people go on the X Factor and they've got these incredible voices and they can do all that gymnastics and stuff? I love that. And I'd love to be able to do those vocal gymnastics, But... I can't, and someone like Elizabeth Cronin, it's just like she's barely opening her mouth, and she's just singing very, very quietly. And fortunately for us, Seamus Ennis, the great pipe player, Uilleann pipe player, he also recorded her, and he got a lot of the long ballads out of her as well. So there's a wealth of
apparently there are 80 song recordings of her, but she no doubt knew way more than 80 songs. But apparently there are 80 songs in an archive. Most of which are public, but there's some private stuff as well. Which, I mean, someone like yourself might one day have access to. They'll go, "Oh, James, come in, listen to this song. Would you be interested in maybe doing your own version of it?" That's the kind of thing that can potentially happen.
I don't know if there's 80. I mean, that seems as though there's a bit more than I know of. But I know there are some that they've kept in the family, and maybe they're not great quality or great quality recordings wise, or maybe they're different versions. She had her work was put out maybe 20 years, I can say 25 years ago, but I could be wrong. A lovely book on Four Courts Press, which was a whole book about the songs and all the different versions, and then it had 2 CDs at the end. And this was the thing, this was the gold, the CDs. Yeah. And the book was very interesting, but unfortunately the book had a few tiny, tiny little mistakes in. Like the notations that were shown were from different versions that she had sang. And because of that, it got one high-profile critical kicking. So,
well, the purists are always going to take something like that.
Oh yeah,
if there's any kind of discrepancies here.
So that book went out of print, and it's been impossible to get. I managed to get a copy just by putting a search on eBay. You know, if Best Cronin ever comes up. So I got a message saying, "Oh, there's a thing." So I put a bid on, and I was lucky to win it. Again, maybe 20 years ago or something. An extraordinary singer, and I think if you're at all interested in Irish music, then you're already going to know her music because she's the source for a lot of it. But if you don't, or if you just love vocalists, or you love traditional music from around the world like I do, then and you don't know her stuff, then wow.
Yeah, and it is unadorned, and it is, you know, just vocal and unaccompanied, and it's extraordinary. It's like listening to a slice of history. I mean, she was born in the sort of 19th century. You know, she died in the middle of the 20th century, so she spans time, and the music sounds like you're listening to ancient Ireland. So
Absolutely.
And I think it goes well with this whiskey as well.
I ended up singing a few songs with one of her granddaughters in a pub in West Cork. It was myself and Ali Roberts. And and then everyone else who was in the pub. So her granddaughter, because we'd done a gig together, I can't remember her name, my apologies. Her granddaughter sang a few songs, it was amazing, and then it went around the pub and everyone would shut up and listen to the singers, and they were all mostly really good. And there was a couple of people who did some kind of country and western stuff, but they was really well sang, and it was all unaccompanied, and I was terrified, you know, and I was almost at the end of the line. And Ali did an incredible version of Lord Gregory, which was one of her songs, and he just nailed it. He was perfect. And
he's a sort of, and Alistair Roberts is, you know, someone that is discovered traditional folk music and really is a very great interpreter of those songs.
I mean, his father was a traditional musician, and Ali's very much into it. A lot. He studies it and he works at it a lot more than I do.
How did you discover this kind of... Because we grew up, as we mentioned, Adam and the Ants and, Madness and things like that we got into as kids. And then we discovered punk rock, so Sex Pistols, The Damned, The Clash, Buzzcocks, etc. Our first gig was The Damned. Exciting stuff, life-changing, actually. But then... You know, as we played in groups, we got into all sorts of different music, but you definitely discovered, and it led you on your own acoustic music path in a way. You discovered folk music, traditional music, and what was it that attracted you to that? I mean, and why get into that particular thing?
I think the answer is that in the 60s, in the mid-60s, my father won half a house in the poker match, or so he says. How true this is, we don't know. But this is one of his stories after a couple of drams. And so we had this house just outside Skibbereen. And when he first got it, there was barely a roof, there was no running water, there was no electricity. So we went there every summer from when I was born, basically, onwards. I mean, there's photos of me down there in the pram. And I remember going there most summers, not every summer, but most summers, up until the age of... 16, 17, 18, and then I started going down. I went down with you a couple of times.
Yeah, we went on a songwriting retreat.
And
it was a Guinness drinking retreat.
Yeah, well, that was it. But the thing with traditional music for me, I've always thought it was because we would go to the pub nearby, which was called the Old Court, and there'd be music playing. And you know, music is such a... It can be such an emotional thing. It's in the part of your brain that brings back memories and stuff, you know. And I think that I was looking for music that reminded me of the music that I heard back then as a young kid. Because the only other traditional music we ever heard was Sheena Wellington, who was a friend of my father's, because we went to the same school as Sheena's kids. So that was the only other traditional music I heard. So I think it has to be that. Mm-hmm. And so the first traditional music I started exploring was Irish traditional music, and then Scottish, and then, thanks to the singing of a lady called Anne Briggs, the English folk music, which at the time I was like, English folk music, it's going to sound Elizabethan and terrible, knowing nothing about it. And then hearing Anne Briggs and just completely falling in love with her delivery and her voice. And it was her who really started me out as a singer as well, because these songs, what are these songs? You know, they've got so much power and beauty in them, you know. And yesterday I was listening to Young Tamling, a 12-minute track that she sings unaccompanied. Just an extraordinary way of telling stories.
No, and again, another artist that you introduced me to, Anne Briggs, and likewise with Bess Cronin. And I know my brother, for example, is a huge fan of Anne Briggs now. And that, as you mentioned before, it's that kind of domino effect. Via me, via you.
Well, I only heard her because I thought she looked pretty on the cover. You know, I mean, I was 20 something.
How shallow, but yes.
Well, absolutely how shallow, but how
the amount of records you've listened to because one has listened to because of that. Look, I think we should move on to dram number 3. Bess Cronin, the little pack of tailors here with A Day at the Funfair.
Yeah, and listen.
And I'm sorry, I'm finishing this dram as well.
No, finish that dram, but the Spotify only has like 2 songs by Bess Cronin on it. So find her music elsewhere. She's absolutely worth tracking down.
This is Malts and Music, brought to you by the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. This podcast has a playlist. Every guest, whether they choose 4 or 5 tunes, we compile them into an ongoing playlist. Go and find that playlist on Spotify. Other streaming platforms available, obviously, but we tend to use Spotify.
But Tidal is better, and Tidal pays the musicians 10 times more money than Spotify.
Well, there you go. Yeah, that's it. Well, I think with the next dram we can maybe talk a bit more. We've talked a bit about you growing up in Fife and us playing in bands and discovering music and so on. But let's move on to dram number 3. It's difficult to even say this word. A curious concatenation. 39.242 is the cask number. It's a deep, rich and dried fruits profile. A first fill ex-Oloroso hogshead cask. It's aged 11 years. The alcohol volume is 57.8. Very strong. Although not as strong as the previous 2. And it's a Speyside. So, a curious how do I say? Concatenation. There you go.
Maybe you should have had that dram at the beginning.
I've got 2 more to go. After 8 years in ex-Bourbon Wood, we transferred this into a first fill Oloroso hogshead. The nose was a curious concatenation of stem ginger in syrup and crema catalana, rye whiskey and peach schnapps, charred wood and marmite on buttered toast, herbs and coal tar soap. There you go. They're covering a few bases on this one.
Yeah. I mean, you can smell the sugar in it straight away. I mean, I was going to say caramel. They used a different term, didn't they? But it is on the nose. It's a sweet whiskey, which is nice,
Yeah, the sweetest so far. And it is darker in colour. Look at that. It smells spectacular. Now, you said at the beginning you were drawn to...
This is the sort of thing...
Sorry.
That when you're first taking the steps out with bog standard whiskey... Oh, wow. When you're first taking the step outside bog standard whiskey, something like this would be really exciting because it's got big flavours. This would be the sort of thing that, in my 20s, I'd give to somebody from Italy.
Right?
Try this, man. Try this.
This will blow your mind.
This is a.
Well, I was going to say you were drawn to the Lagavulins and the Lafroigs and the incredibly peaty guys that we all know. But this is a completely different. I'm just about to have a sip. I am increasingly drawn to these kind of sherry-ish Speysides.
Yeah, but these are big. This is big flavors in comparison to the last one. That's what I mean. It's a very not obvious, but it's there. It
fills the mouth.
Fills the mouth.
It's not got fire at the back of.
No, not at all. No.
And it's sort of palate coating.
Yeah.
It's a Christmas dram. Maybe.
Yeah, a Christmas dram. I would say that. Yeah. It's
I mean, it's probably boring for people for me to say, "God, this one's good as well." But it is, and this is spectacular. Though this is a really rich, beautiful dram. As I say, deep, rich, and dried fruits is the flavour profile, and you have paired this up with Philippé Tabane.
Philippé Tabane, yeah. I mean, I've got no idea how his name is pronounced. But I mean, I've always pronounced it Philippé Tabane just because Philip is Philip and Tabane, it looks like Tabane. But I mean, it could be anything.
Well, I've given the opportunity to sort of go the other way.
Philippé Tabane. Philippé Tabane.
Tell me a bit about this guy, because again, he's quite new to me.
Oh, well, he's just one of these guys that I first heard maybe 30 years ago, and he's stuck with me ever since. The reason I got we talked about the Anne Briggs one, how she was Bonnie on the cover. Mm-hmm. So I got that one. With this Philippé Tabane album, and that may not be how his name is pronounced, obviously. The one which I heard, which isn't this one, because Spotify didn't have it, he's pulling a face on the cover. And he's kind of going like this, and you can see that his neck is already pulled, and he's going, and he's there with his guitar, and he just looks like, whoa, what is this? Mm-hmm. And I remember getting it, and just, he was kind of rolled in with jazz, but he never called it jazz. He's a South African guitar player and singer, and on this track he plays the whistle as well, the tin whistle as well. But his music he always used to say it was more spiritual, and it was in reference to it was his tribal music, and
his ancestors.
He always looked to his mother as the thing. So when they said when they called it jazz, he was never really in agreement with that. But then, where else would you put it? It's quite avant-garde music.
Well, yeah, I'd not heard this until you chose this, and you've introduced me to lots of African music and lots of traditional music from all around the world. But it's quite a minimal piece. It's kind of thumb piano.
Yeah.
A little bit of, I thought it was a flute actually, but you say a whistle and his guitar.
Well, maybe
player.
It is a flute, but I think
it's like a 6-7 minute track, and not much happens in it other than it ebbs and flows. It's beautiful. And again, I listened to the rest of the album, and there are some other similar tracks. A couple of other slightly more pushy tracks, if you like, a little bit more themed and up-tempo. But a lot of this, it's almost, I mean, it's not ambient music, but it's very subtle and minimal, it's spiritual, as you say.
He's an extraordinary musician.
Yeah.
He's someone who's come along and he sounds like nothing else. And he carried on doing that throughout his career. Although he did work with bands and stuff, and I kind of think it diluted it a bit. And but the albums where it was just him with the malambo, the drums, and just him on the guitar.
Malambo is the name of the band that he's. Well, I think it's probably.
It's him plus, it's like the Fall,
you know
what I mean? It's the Fall or something, it's Marky Smith plus. But on this one, it's just him playing with a guy called Gabriel Sonny Boy Thojane or something. I wouldn't quite know how to pronounce it. And Gabriel is playing the thumb piano, the Mabira. And he's just jamming along. Philippé Tabane's just jamming along with the tin whistle, and he's singing through it as well, so you've got that flute noise, that kind of... And then halfway through, he puts the flute down and he just picks out some of his incredible guitar. And he's just one of those guys who would start with a riff and just kind of running after it, and then he would start singing along. So a lot of his albums have got... I'm going to say scat, but I don't mean he's like going doobie-doobie-doobie, but he's singing along in that style.
Improvising,
where he's matching what he's playing on the guitar, and it's just it sounds like nothing else, and for me that's hugely valuable. Again, going back to the source. Some of the stuff later on in his career when he's playing with bands, as I said, isn't really for me when it's the full band thing. But
well, this track is called Dithabeng or Dithabeng. It's from an album called The Indigenous Afro Jazz Sounds of Philippé Tabane or Philippé Tabane.
Yeah.
And Malombo is the band. It's to me, people might have their guards up if they hear avant-garde. Scary.
Yeah.
This is something. It is slightly avant-garde, but it's something that you could put on and relax and lose yourself in.
Oh yeah, my kids love
it. Well, your kids love it.
Yeah,
right?
well, I mean, they don't leave the room when I put it on, which they do with some other stuff.
Well, fair enough.
No, it's an amazing album. I was very pleased to see it on Spotify. It's not my favourite album of his, but it's one of my favourite albums of his.
Yeah.
And he came to mind when I was.
Yeah.
And
this particular dram and this particular piece of music?
Because
you enjoy drinking them and listening to them at the same time.
The silence that Philippé Tabane uses in his music is and Briggs too, is like a bridge. It's like, and the people who can make music like that, where they they use the silence and they're not scared of the silence. I think that's a great thing. There's too much noise in music, and with this dram, there is that. It's so thick that there is that kind of bridge element to it. It's just like it's all there, and it came to mind. I mean, I can't really say why, but what have I written down? Caramel, hints of peat, funnily enough, and thick, and that's what it came by. But again, it's that thing. I would love to be paired with Philippé Tabane if I made a whiskey. I mean,
and this is a delicious whiskey. As
I said, he's an extraordinary musician, and this is a very good whiskey. So
now, just
I can put a wee bit of water in this.
I think I'm going to do the same. It just caught the back of my throat a little bit there, but in a nice way, in a fiery way.
You've got the.
You mentioned Domino Records. Talking about your career, I mean, you've had an incredible career. Forget the bands that we were in, although we did our best, and we wrote a couple of good tunes. But you signed to Domino Records. You put out your first album, Moving Up Country, 2001, and there's 10 official studio albums, countless EPs and singles and compilations and different kind of self-releases and things like that. But I think, am I right? 10 official studio albums now under the James Yorkston moniker.
I think I'd have to count, to be honest.
Right.
I mean, it's what I've always thought. An album is an album of songs, and I've definitely put out more than 10 albums of songs.
Oh yeah, I know that.
You know what I mean. So
I think with Domino, there's, as far as I know, whether it be...
Yeah, well, let's say 10. I mean, I don't know.
That's good.
Yeah,
10 albums in 21 years isn't bad. I mean, that's almost up with The Fall, who you mentioned. It's not... Some people put out, 4 albums in 21 years, and...
It's all about quantity and not quality as well, as you know. No, Mike, when we were...
We should... Quick disclaimer...
We knew it was going to happen.
This was going to happen. Yeah, we discussed this in advance. Everyone knows me as Vic Galloway, radio personality, and so on. But my real name is Michael, and James, we've known each other for a long time, so the occasional Mike slips out. So there you go. You heard one earlier as well. But anyway, go on.
So in our 20s, we were in bands. We signed a couple of tiny wee record deals, or maybe just one tiny wee record deal. We did a bit of touring. We did some good shows, some terrible shows. We wrote some okay songs, a lot of terrible songs, that sort of thing. But when I signed to Domino, the point of me saying all that is I was aware how valuable it was to have a record deal with a good record company, because God knows we had tried.
Yeah.
We had sent stuff to Peel time and time again. I don't think he ever played us.
He played Huckleberry, one of the later bands, and as did Steve Lamacq.
I remember Steve Lamacq, but no disrespect to Steve. John Peel.
You wanted John Peel to play.
Yeah.
John Peel played one of the, I think the one of the first EPs. But anyway, moving on.
Okay.
Because John Peel became a champion of yours. Obviously, he sadly passed away, but and on your first album, he was a fan. And did he not refer to you as the greatest singer-songwriter of his generation, or
some nonsense like that, which I've put on every, or Domino has put on every press release since. Yeah. Well, I mean, you do when it's something like Peel.
Well, we grew up listening to him.
Yeah. No, it's hugely important, and the music. I think he was the music that he played was hugely important in my musical education as well, because
he would play Bess Cronin.
He would play Philippé Tabane. Yeah, he'd play Ted Lucas probably. And he played me. I did a session for him, which is extraordinary, and so an important part. So what were we discussing? So yeah, I signed to Domino, and the point was, I'm gonna take it seriously. Mm-hmm. I'm not gonna let the
What were the options though? It was gonna. I seem to remember you working in a bookshop or something around that time.
Yeah, I was working in a bookshop. I was working in the old James Thins. And I just got plucked from some kind of obscurity to do a tour with John Martin, the 30 days or whatever it was.
Some good stories about
with
that.
John Martin, yeah. And things seemed to be happening. It was a weird time. I got mixed up with some people down in London who were very enthusiastic about my music, but I ended up signing to Domino because my lawyer, when they saw the other record company, sent me a contract. My lawyer saw it and said that I wasn't allowed to sign it. It was such a bad contract that if I insisted on signing it, he was going to have to resign as my lawyer.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's a bad contract.
Yeah, no. And when a lawyer says something like that...
Yeah. But you and I had been out watching Future Pilot AKA, is that
I know,
right?
well, that's the night that you met Lawrence Bell, who runs Domino Records. We went out on, to watch some bands and have a couple of beers, and Lawrence came along for a few beers afterwards.
Yeah.
I remember speaking to the Pastels, and they were like, no, we're going back to Glasgow. But this lanky bloke went, yeah, I'll come for another beer.
Yeah.
And it was Lawrence, and you guys, I distinctly remember you hit it off. Lawrence and I talked about punk rock, and we bonded over the Stupids and bands like that, Ipswich bands. But you and he bonded over
American hardcore and traditional folk music.
And Bess Cronin and Shirley Collins and Anne Briggs, whatever. He was discovering that world, perhaps at a similar sort of time as you were.
Same age as us, yeah. I mean, that was great. I mean, I thought I was selling to the other record company at the time, so when he said, I'm a record company, I'd never heard of them, I'd never heard of Domino, so it wasn't, and because I thought I was selling to this other company, I wasn't I wasn't treating him with any great, so, we were just talking as very enthusiastic people with music, and I remember we went out drinking till 3 or 4 in the morning, drinking in the youth hostel somewhere, playing songs on the piano.
Aberfeldy, let's give them a shout out. Riley Briggs from
yeah.
Aberfeldy was playing Neil Young songs and Beatles. Of course, drink responsibly, don't go out till 3 or 4 in the morning and, go to strange youth hostels. But it did happen that night.
But I didn't think I'd see him again. We exchanged addresses. I didn't think I'd see him again. But like maybe a week later, I got a small crate of CDs. I was skint at the time, completely skint, and I love music. So this crate of CDs coming in my door, it was just, oh my Lord, look at this. And there was stuff on it like Pairings and Fortet, which is just absolutely right up my street, So I sent him back down a CD, to say thanks, I sent him back down a CD of the Fence Collective, who had been talking about. So it had King Creosote, HMS Jennifer, Unpock, Lone Pigeon. And then at the end, I put 4 of my songs at the end. And he just got in touch and said, is that you singing at the end? I said, which one? He said, is it the Lang tune? I said, yeah, that's me. And he said, oh my God, do you want to sign a Domino record?
Yeah, it's my favourite one on the company.
And I was like, well, no, I'm signing to these other people. But then my lawyer rang up and said, I can't have you signing for this first record company because the contract's so bad. And you could hear the deflation in my voice. This was end of my 20s, all my 20s looking for a record deal, and he was one getting taken away from me. And he said, out of, some kind of forlorn hope, is there anyone else who's shown any interest? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, there was this label actually called Domino Records.
And he was like, yeah, they're great.
Like, what are we doing wasting our time talking to these idiots? Get on the phone to Domino, see if they still want you. So I wrote Lawrence a very apologetic email. Hey, man, you know,
actually,
sorry.
maybe I do want to say
my lawyer says that you're the guy, you know, that you're the label for me, and you know, and I'm wondering if you still want to chat. And he came up like 2 days later, met me in a bar, Pivo actually. I don't know if Pivo still exists in Edinburgh. And
it's called something else now, Bunker.
And then I told him what I wanted to do, which was make music. And then he came back later that week to see us play in the jazz bar. I can't remember what it's called now. The Queen Street Oyster Bar it was.
Yeah.
And
I came to the show, I remember. And there weren't that many people there. It was a little showcase for him, really.
Yeah.
And you sounded good and played well. And yeah, he signed you.
Yeah, and he signed us, and we had the contract on the table the following Tuesday.
21 years later, 10 albums later. To move the podcast along so it's not too much of an epic, and I feel slightly ashamed. Look at your glasses. Having sips and being very responsible.
I'll tell you
I'm
what,
about to finish dram number 3.
But let me tell you,
as our listeners and viewers will always know, I tend to drink all the drams. But I think I'm going to do the same in this podcast. You're going to have to carry me out the room, James. No,
with the exception of the COVID years, the last 21 years of my life have been spent touring. So, and when you're on the road, you can drink every single night.
Yeah.
And no one looks at you in a funny way.
Yeah, of course.
You know, you get off stage.
Is there any other occupation other than the music industry where you're actively encouraged? There's a large bottle of whiskey.
Yeah, well, that was it. We used to have whiskey on our rider, you know. We used to have just the usual names. A bottle of whiskey. Talisker was one that I always used to ask for, but we also had Bowmore, Lagavulin, obviously that we never got that. What else? Balvenie we had, you know, just kind of a mixture of nice supermarket whiskies, you know. And so I've drank a lot of whiskey in my life, and I have a lot of opportunities to drink whiskey. So although I'm very happy to be here and sipping these wonderful drinks, I don't really feel the need to get completely
fair enough. And as I say, this is not some kind of competition. To me, a curious concatenation was the finest dram so far. I mean, they're all completely different, but I tend to be sort of attracted towards the deep, rich and dried fruits profile, and that was a great example.
Yeah, that was a very nice one for me. It wasn't the most subtle of them, but that's not a bad thing. As I said earlier, it's the one you'd kind of give to people if you're presenting Scotland.
Blowing someone's mind.
Say, hey, taste this, man. Just taste this.
And even after a water palate cleanser, I'm still feeling it coating my mouth.
Yeah. I mean, I'd very, very happily give a bottle of that to anyone. I'd be very proud to be coming over.
Moving on to dram number 4 with James Yorkston here on Malts and Music. We've got Tar in the Night, which is 16.50. Some tasting notes here. Through the darkness came a thick treacle of golden syrup, nut oils, and heavy tar, stuck on Wellington boots alongside clumps of clean earth that suggested rhubarb and roasted root vegetables. There you go, a couple of bases covered there. It's a recharred hogshead cask, only 6 years old, this one. Very high alcohol content, so I may not finish it. Famous last words. 64.1%. And it's a Highland Southern regional peated whiskey. Peated is the profile. I would assume that when you tried all these drams, this might have been your favourite.
It was my favourite, yeah.
Okay.
Straight away, it was my favourite. I thought this was an extraordinary whiskey. Mm-hmm. I thought it's a whiskey that kept on giving. Mm-hmm. The one before, as we said, I loved it. Not a problem with it whatsoever. But this one is so much subtler and so much more subtle, and different flavors just pinged out as I was drinking it. It's this is a beautiful, very delicious and light whiskey. It's funny, I have medicinal and TCP and it was just. But it's way more than that. There's way more flowers, and I think you said fruits in there as well. It's all over the place, this one, in a good way. You know, this is like looking over a calm sea, and you're seeing the dolphins, and you're seeing you're seeing the seabirds, and there's little things just poking out. You know, this is obviously pretentious nonsense I'm talking about.
No, we like pretentious nonsense.
But this is it. You know, it's a very subtle. It's a lovely drink. Enjoy.
Yeah, Slange. Oh, here we go. I'm first nose and taste. Yeah, I mean the peat straight away. I mean, there's even on the nose. I've not even taken a sip yet, and it's peated, but certainly on the nose it could be heavily peated. But I'm going in, and 64%.
Yeah, no, you can tell.
Hello. That's the chefs next door banging on the walls. If anyone's wondering what that, it's not. Could actually be someone saying, "Hurry up and finish this podcast."
Yeah. Those tables are booked.
Yeah. Okay, let me. Oh, the nose is incredible. It's salty. It's. Right. Okay. Wow. Actually, as someone that's drunk a lot of peated whiskey, there's a sweetness to it as well.
Yeah, and that's really good. I remember actually from drinking this that I actually preferred it with a wee bit of water in as well. So I'm just going to put a wee bit of water in.
I'm going to keep the water out just now.
Which is my want, by the way, with whiskey. I do tend to have water or ice in it. I know people say it's not allowed and stuff, but
no. Each to their own. And this is the thing. It's kind of you discover music in any way, shape, or form that you can do, and the same with whiskey. I think if someone wants to stick a couple of ice cubes in, that's up to them.
Oh yeah, no, you should definitely put some water in it. Opens it out.
Yep.
It's this is a lovely, warming, subtle. I know it's got the fire in it. I know it's got the peat, but especially when you put some water in, it's just Oh wow, there's a great aftertaste as well right at the very back, which
Tar in the Night is quite a good
Tar in the Night. I have to say, I kind of I would argue with that. I love these descriptions, and I feel that they're written on some kind of.
People are having a lot of fun.
Yeah, people are having fun, and there
playful.
probably is. There must be an app that somebody has made, which is a
whiskey description.
Yeah, generic whiskey description. I'm not entirely sure if they're on the nail with this one. For me, this is a lot lighter, and it does have a tiny wee bit of vanilla there as well. And,
as I was saying, I think it's sweet for a peated whiskey.
Yeah.
You don't tend to get sweetness from a peated whiskey, but this has got.
And this is floral as well. It's a. This is a lovely whiskey. This is probably my favourite of the four.
Yeah, I thought it might be. It's extraordinary.
But I've enjoyed them all. I know I haven't finished them, but I've enjoyed them all.
I mean, this is your second tasting of all of them.
Yeah. No, it is. Yeah, and I enjoyed them more thoroughly the first time round as well.
You've paired this one with a current artist, Susan Bear. And the track is M6. It's taken from her new album Alter, which is released on the Lost Map label, which is a label run from the Isle of Egg. We can maybe go into a little bit more detail. But she's a Glasgow-based musician. I think she currently plays bass with the Pastels. She also plays in the Pictish Trail live band. She's played with Martha Fionn and all sorts of different people. Very talented young woman who used to play with Tough Love, I remember as well.
I keep an eye on what's going on with Lost Map. I think Johnny Pictish Trail has got a very interesting taste. He's a lot poppier than most of the music I listen to. But there's always, when my friend Unpoc signed to Domino, when his album got so heroically reviewed over in Scandinavia, the main review came and it said, the first line was, "I've reviewed too many albums this week and my ears are tired, but this is on Domino and it's a sign of quality." And that's kind of how I feel about the Lost Map stuff. It's not really, a lot of it really isn't up my street. It's a lot more poppy, but there's always something there. There's a sign of quality. And sometimes he just gets it absolutely right. And I'm not saying that he had anything to do with this record. I have no idea if he did. But the Susan Bear record is, I think, a very, in these times, a kind of unique, bubbling little pop record. There's no huge melodies on there. There's no screaming for radio play. There's nothing show-offy about it. it's like a...
It's quite dreamy, it's quite ethereal, it's quite hazy.
Yeah.
But you say there's nothing show-offy about it. You're right, but there are really strong melodies.
Oh yeah. But I mean, there's not like an Angels chorus, a Robbie Williams kind of big...
Yeah, no.
It sounds to me...
I love her chord changes and her way with melody. I have to say, I think the throughout this album and previous things I've heard, there's something particularly melodic. Because she plays with so many other people, perhaps, and she's become an exquisite songwriter in her own way.
Yeah, I mean, in this song there's the bit, which is I'm a sucker for, that sort of thing. But what I was going to say before that bit is, I love people who are doing music for music's sake, and they concentrate on the beauty of the music. And that sounds to me, this album sounds like that to me. I mean, I could be wrong. This could be her really shooting for the stars and making the poppiest record she's capable of. And really, this is going to be a hit. Elton John's going to take, because this is what she sounds like. Yeah. Elton John's going to take it off. But I don't think it is. I think that Suze has made an album for the sake of the beauty of the music, and that for me is hugely important. As a music fan, when listening to music, the integrity behind the album or the track is important for me. Mm-hmm. I mean, I appreciate just a really well-written pop song, Erasure, Pet Shop Boys, Soft Cell, anything like that, I really appreciate it. Paul McCartney, anything like that. But I also love people who are doing music because they love music. That's hugely valuable for me. And that's what I think the Susan Bear album is. I think it's one of those, it's been made for the sake of the music. Yeah,
well, I enjoy this album as well, and playing tracks on my radio show as a result of it. It is it sounds a bit effortless, actually. I'm sure she'd be delighted, to hear that, but it does sound effortless, and it doesn't sound like it's trying too hard. Yeah, it's like the Ted Lucas album. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Sounding effortless.
Sonically, it sounds quite different, but there's something very natural and effortless about it. Yeah. But
effortless doesn't mean that they haven't put any effort into it.
No, certainly not.
I mean, it's the ideal sound. You want it to sound relaxed, and there's another person I know whose music I absolutely adore, whose first album I absolutely adore, and their second album came out recently. And it just sounds as though they've sat in front of the computer for too long tweaking things. So instead of the kind of lovely, relaxed feeling that you get with the Susan Bear album, where you just think, oh, this is perfect, I don't have to worry about this album, you get the kind of feeling, oh, why did they do that? Oh, why did they do that?
They've fine-tuned this.
Yeah, they've tried to get to take their music to the next level, which is Radioland for most people. But I don't get that at all from this record, and as I said, that's very valuable to me. And that works with this whiskey, because this whiskey for me it's although it's peaty and it does sound a bit weird, me putting it in this context, it does have a kind of, well, here I am quality about it, which again, it's the best thing. When you come across anything, a book or a drink or music, anything which is just presenting itself, and you can trust it. That's a great thing,
Well, it's a great soundtrack to any dram, but particularly this one. You mentioned books. You, as well as being a recording artist and having these 10 or so albums behind you, you also play in a trio, Yorkston Thorn Can, which more recently was Yorkston Thorn Gatic, which is another, perhaps, exploring your interest in music from different parts of the world, and in this case, India. Yeah. But you're a published author now. You've had a Tour Diaries book published, and then a first novel, 3 Craws, and then just about, and possibly by the time this podcast goes out, new novel called The Book of the Gales.
Yeah.
So tell us about the going into writing and being a novelist. I mean, your love of words, your love of creating things.
Yeah, words is a good thing, but it's more about, where you and I, you're almost 50, I'm 50. If I can get to retirement age doing nothing but art, music and literature and stuff, I'm going to be over the moon.
Yeah.
You know, if I can say, oh, well, this is what I've chosen to do with my life. I've chosen, okay, a lot of it is hard work, you know, touring, airports, organizing all this sort of stuff. A lot of it is hard work. I'm not going to pretend it's easy. But if I can get to the end of my life having spent most of it with art, I think that is going to be something I can stand up to on my deathbed. Up deathbed. I don't know if that's going to work.
Lie down to. Lay in the grave and look up at. Yeah.
But creating depression's a horrible thing, as I'm sure you're aware. Creating is something that just takes me far away from it. And it leads me to a very, I just feel as if I'm me. Writing books, I wrote books in my 20s, they were awful, like the worst things. They were as bad as the songs that we wrote in our 20s, if you can imagine.
I've never read any of them, so I can't comment.
No, but I mean, I never really finished any of them. But writing is just such a wonderful headspace to get into. And from a creative point of view, if you've got the two things going on at once, if you've got the music going on and a book or a screenplay, you know, it's creatively, they match each other and they work really well. So imagine if you will, I have to write some songs for an album, and I go down to my studio and I look through my notes and there's nothing which is really inspiring me. But then I remember I'm halfway through a novel and say, oh, well, I can just go into the novel and just flood the prose out, and it's a great thing to be able to. So
sometimes one part of your brain might be, I have some melodies here. I can you know, jam on a little melody on my own, and sometimes it's like, nah, it's not really happening, but I've got words. Let me sit and type or scribble or whatever.
It just gives you another somewhere else to go as a path of least resistance.
Yeah,
and that's what I'm trying to do with my life. I know it sounds really pretentious saying that, but it comes down to the thing. Most of us in this country are so lucky that we have things like what's left of the NHS and things, that we do have the option to try and make a living out of art if that's what one is into. And I think when you see that the people who are trying to get into this country, you know, you see these poor refugees and risking their lives to get here. If I wasn't going to do music or art or whatever because I was a wee bit worried about what the review was going to say, I think it would just be an insult to all those guys and girls, you know, and all the people who are taken away and
that's a great point.
Conscripted into war. You know, if you look back into the First World War, the Second World War, and the conscriptions that took place, I wouldn't have wanted to go to war. You know, so there's a part of me that thinks I'm doing this because I have the opportunity, and the book is just part of that. I'm going to
put it on the records. We are pretty much the luckiest people that have lived in the history of humanity, and you know,
you and I personally.
Well, perhaps.
Yeah.
We're certainly two of the
two of them.
People.
Yeah.
And you know, we're lucky to be able to, you know, make art and
and sit here drinking whiskey.
Conscripted and sit here drinking whiskey.
Not being conscripted is a hugely important thing, and I think it's part of that for me is not wasting one's life, and for me, doing art and music is the thing that makes me feel as though I'm not wasting my life. You know.
Well, James, I think that's a fine way to end today's podcast. Malts and Music with James Yorkston. Thank you very much. Brought to you by the Scotch Malt Whisky Society.
Thank you
with
very
this
much.
lovely Tar in the Night 1650.
Extraordinary whiskey, and I'm glad you left it to last.
Old pal, it's great chatting to you. And
Cheers.
Slàinte mhath.
All the best.
And thanks for watching or listening.